Chapter 1. Halloween, 1978. The jack-o'-lantern scowled at him as he pulled up to the curb in an unmarked car. Trick-or-treat was long over with on this waning Halloween night. Yet the carved pumpkin's menacing eyes seemed to glow with surreal intensity, as if the dying flame were burning brighter the closer it came to being snuffed out. Adding to the macabre effect were the swirling emergency lights of nearly a dozen police cruisers, ambulances, and a coroner's meat wagon. The mixing red and blue swirls of light illuminated the entire suburban Pittsburgh neighborhood, as if it were footage from some tripped-out psychedelic film. Bottom line, the department had sent out everything, and everyone, on this one. And then they had summoned him. Detective Finbarr Mulcahy was on the rise in the Pittsburgh Police Department. His systematic, hyper-organized, and downright dogged approach to solving cases was revolutionizing an institution known for sweating its suspects and turning screws to elicit bogus confessions and slam shut flimsy case files. Still, these hard-edged, ham-handed police tactics weren't going quietly, regardless of what those black-robed liberals on the Supreme Court had to say about criminals' rights. That's because those bare-knuckled tactics produced results. But Finbarr Mulcahy was showing the draconian department another way. Indeed, this short-statured, scrub-faced, potato-eating Irishman was solving more crimes and serving up better cases to the DA than anyone else in the department. And the brass upstairs was taking notice. Not only was Mulcahy's meticulous approach turning heads inside the department, it was raising appreciative eyebrows everywhere from the prosecutor's office to the mayor's oak-paneled chambers downtown. In just a few short years on the force, one of the department's first college-educated detectives was earning a reputation and a nickname. The young assistant district attorneys were beginning to refer to Mulcahy as Brickhouse. It was a play on the Commodore's ode to the attributes of a particularly voluptuous woman. But as the moniker applied to Mulcahy, it had nothing to do with his physical features, which were a pathetic assemblage of knobby knees, concave chest, and bony arms. Indeed, his physical features represented the polar opposite of the solidly constructed female physique over which the Commodores crooned. Instead, Mulcahy had earned the nickname for the sturdy foundation upon which his cases were built, and it had everything to do with the soaring conviction rates the appreciative assistant district attorneys were reaping from his hard work and attention to detail. Word was getting around. When Finbarr Mulcahy made a case, it stuck. It didn't merely hold up, it was solid as a brick house. Not that the bookish, backward, and culturally out-of-touch Irishman knew thing one about the Commodores, but the hip, long-haired, high-minded ADAs sure did, and they were personally and professionally thankful that at least one detective on the force wasn't serving them up shit sandwiches. Such was the unappetizing offerings of the senior homicide officer, Detective Sal Flores. Lately, an alarming number of Flores's collars were falling apart at the seams. Some blew up a trial where crucial evidence, usually the forced confessions that the Brillo-haired Italian arm-twisted out of his suspects, would be tossed out. Other tenuous convictions got overturned on appeal. More recently, some of his cases were being quietly shelved before they ever proceeded to trial, as more and more assistant district attorneys were developing allergies to his handiwork. It marked a changing of the guard. The unassuming Mulcahy represented the department's studious, scientific future. Flores, its bludgeoning, nightstick-wielding, bull-in-a-china-shop past. Now the two of them were about to clash over the brutal, heartbreaking, and haunting case that was young Alicia Franklin's malicious and mysterious murder. When the battle was over, both would bear the scars for the rest of their lives. Despite all those emergency vehicles, the scene outside the Franklin house was quiet. The time for sirens was over. Little Alicia was beyond all that now. Instead, a gathering of East Hills residents kept a quiet vigil at the borders of the crime scene tape that cordoned off adjoining properties of the tightly packed 2- and 3-story houses and duplexes with their long, skinny backyards. The wide-eyed, silent crowd was a stone-faced yet expectant cross-section of women in thick housecoats, pulled tight at the necks against the late autumn chill. Kids still clad in their costumes, and dads in jeans and fall-weight Pittsburgh Steelers jackets. Mulcahy kept moving, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his trench coat, his eyes cast down at the sidewalk. He trotted to the house and bounded up its concrete steps to an astroturf-carpeted front porch. The detective pulled aside his coat and flashed his badge clipped to his belt at the 2 uniforms standing sentry at the door. One nodded in permission, and Mulcahy pulled open the storm door and pushed in on the wooden inner door. The first thing he noticed about the Franklin home, aside from the collection of ambulance crew members and uniformed cops milling around with nothing to do, was the lack of furniture, family photos, wall hangings, or knickknacks of any kind. The living room, if one could call it that, consisted of a console TV atop 2 stacked milk crates. There was a folding lawn chair placed before the TV, and a collapsible table stand to the right of the chair. Atop the TV dinner table was a large glass ashtray littered with stubbed-out cigarette butts and a 6-pack of Iron City tall boys. Every last one was a drained, dead soldier from a night's worth of drinking. Mulcahy took in the scene without stopping. This was not his destination. He remained on a beeline path through the house. He passed through a hallway that gave onto a garish yellow and green-colored kitchen. At the table to the right, Flores, his checkered sport coat stretched tight across his gorilla-like back and shoulders, hovered over a skinny, mustached man caked in drying blood. The father, Mulcahy thought. The man was seated on one of the green kitchen chairs, his face drawn, his expression blank, his eyes lost and vacant, as if 10,000 miles away. He wore his daughter's drying, browning blood, like some sort of tribal ritual. Patches of it were smeared on his face. It covered his arms and his wife-beater T-shirt, too. But whatever menace had dwelled within this broken man had since drained away. The father stared up at the simian-like detective with absolutely nothing to offer, or fear. It was as if Al Franklin was above it all now. A loser all his life, he had finally lost everything. He had nothing left to protect, and no one could hurt him anymore. Mulcahy could tell at once that the investigation had gone nowhere. Flores' partner, Jack Nesto, jerked his head at Mulcahy. Catching his partner's signal, Flores rotated his thick neck, glaring at Mulcahy from under a Cro-Magnon forehead. The knot of his tie, as big as a child's fist, pulled at the lead detective's tree-stump neck. Mulcahy dropped his chin in muted acknowledgment of his peers, and then immediately proceeded to the sliding glass patio door. The exchange happened so quickly, Flores never had the opportunity to object to Mulcahy's presence, much less refuse the young detective access to the crime scene. Instead, Flores could only watch as Mulcahy bypassed them all on his way to the patio, the place where little Alicia lay in a pool of her own blood. It was a tableau of violence and rage so extreme, it made even jaded detectives wince. The dark glass of the sliding door lit up at regular intervals with camera flashes that were as bright and blinding as lightning strikes. Mulcahy slid open the door and was greeted by the pleasant chill of the moonless autumn night. Outside, Coroner Chet Winnick stood with his lips pursed and his arms crossed at the edge of the concrete patio. Clad in his dark suit and out-of-fashion slender tie, Win, as he was known, looked every bit the undertaker he was. He waited patiently as a police photographer shot pictures of the brutal, bloody scene. The way the cameraman, with his instrument pressed to his face, circled the 12-year-old dead girl, contorting his body and craning his neck to get the shot, reminded Mulcahy of a vulture. But weren't they all? The entire homicide team? They were there to pick over the bones in the name of justice. They told themselves they did this to speak for the victim, but none of it mattered to Alicia Franklin. Not anymore. The little girl had gone out one Halloween night dressed as Olivia Newton-John from the year's hit movie Grease, only to end up nearly decapitated from a killer's jagged-edged knife, which had been drawn across her throat with fanatical fury. Nothing would matter to her ever again. In the camera flashes, the crime scene came alive in bright bursts of bloody detail, only to go pitch black again. These flashing images embedded themselves in Mulcahy's mind as surely as if captured on film. The drying blood drenching Alicia's 1950s sweater. The girl's right leg twisted so unnaturally underneath her poodle skirt. The little girl's hands reaching out, her fingers clawed, as if frozen by death in mid-struggle. Little Alicia's maturing but still innocent face, now a blue-gray, except for the touches of makeup that completed her costume. The skin and muscles that once animated her features were slack, like a rubber mask too big for her skull. All of Alicia's life force had been robbed the moment the nerves, arteries, and veins in her neck were cut like electric wires, as the killer drew his blade underneath her chin. The wound itself was deep, dark and sloppy-mouthed, as foul and hungry as the devil's own, a putrid maw of an orifice to blow the stink of death into the faces of the living. As the images flashed before him, Mulcahy watched trance-like, as still and unblinking as a statue. He would not remember how long he remained frozen, letting the details of Alicia Franklin's brutal murder bore directly into his brain and seep intravenously into his unconscious. He only knew what eventually interrupted him, ending his communion with the dead and severing his connection with the dark mind of a murderer. A person who must possess a soul as wasted and crumbling as a burnt black cinder. The interruption was Sal Flores's self-satisfied voice.
"Looks like they dragged you out here for naught, Finnegan,"
Flores bellowed as he stepped loudly onto the patio, a bully marking his territory. Instantly, Mulcahy's eyes fell shut in wistful defeat, as the images, ideas, and connections to the crime rushed away from him, as if now elusive from his grasp. Seconds passed that seemed like minutes. Then the young detective lifted his head, opened his eyes, and re-entered the world. But Mulcahy didn't turn and face his colleague and chief rival in the department. Not yet.
"Finbarr,"
Mulcahy corrected, with his back turned away. Flores's features mutated with annoyance.
"This Mick was always trying to throw him off his game."
"Come again," Flores said, "and try wiping the mashed potatoes out of your mouth."
"Finbarr,"
Mulcahy repeated, then swung around.
"The name's Finbarr, but you can call me Finn."
"Whatever," Flores shooed away the issue, but still managed to look confused and irritated. Point is, we didn't call you. And we don't need you down here. We got everything under control. As you Joe College types might say, my conversation with the father has borne fruit." Mulcahy's emerald eyes came alive, almost as if one could see his powerful brain at work behind them. "How's that?" "He's the doer," Flores answered, then jerked his thumb toward the house. "The sick schmuck's covered in blood. His old lady left him 6 weeks back. Didn't leave him a pot to piss in. He sees the kid 1 day a week. Other than that, he sits there day in and day out in his sad sack shack, nursing his rage with cigarette butts and beer." Mulcahy nodded. It sounded right so far. But he suspected that Flores was about to make a huge and wholly unsupported leap in logic. "So, Daddy's little girl comes home dressed in her poodle skirt," Flores went on. Everyone on the patio focused on the lead detective's deductions. "Only she's not such a little girl no more. Not all dressed up in her costume with her hair teased and made up on. Maybe she reminds him of the old lady, you know, when times were good. Only his brain's been marinating in Iron City for a month. So instead of getting nostalgic, he gets mad, burning mad. He flies right off into a regular rage. Suddenly, Daddy's little girl is the old lady. She's just like her. And Sadsack gets the idea that if he can't have her, then neither can the wife. So he gets out a knife and settles the score. A limp dick's way of slicing up the community property." Flores grinned, then raised a beefy, hair-covered hand to his throat, pulling at his too-tight shirt collar. He was the picture of pride. The streetwise cop had swooped in and solved another one. Better still, he'd beaten the college-educated pencil pusher to the collar. "So he confessed?" Mulcahy inquired. "He's a little, tongue-tied at the moment," Flores frowned. "We're giving him some time to stew, you know? Make his own gravy. Then we'll haul him downtown and turn up the heat." "Well," Mulcahy pondered, "it's a theory." He paused pensively. Now all eyes were on him. "I've just never seen these circumstances before." Flores narrowed his eyes and propped his fists on his hips. The maneuver tested the seams of his sport coat. "Shows the difference between textbooks and experience," the senior detective spat back. "Estranged husbands pull the ripcord all the time. The wife tries to break up the family, and the husband says, 'Hell no, not so fast.' Shit. They know they don't stand a snowball's chance in divorce court, so some take matters into their own hands." "They do," Mulcahy agreed. "But not like this." By now, Winnick, Nesto, and even the evidence photographer were glued to the two detectives' clash as if it were a presidential debate, one that soon could involve fists and nightsticks. "First off, even the most enraged fathers don't hack their daughters to death," Mulcahy countered in flat, even tones that smacked of lecturing. "If they're going to do such a thing, they use a gun, typically when the kid's asleep. Secondly, they almost invariably take themselves out as well. The estranged wife, too, if they can arrange it. The whole misguided idea is to reunite the family in death, after it's been torn asunder in life. In a sick way, it's a desperate act of love, really. The exact opposite of what we have here." Flores's fleshy mouth became a tight, constricted O. For the moment, he was an apple-cheeked school kid who just received a lecture from the principal. Then his features shifted. "Oh, yeah?" He drew out his words, as if stalling for time while his mind groped for a comeback.
What pipe-smoking, tweed-jacketed ivory tower professor who never worked a case in his life taught you that? Flores finally demanded. Meantime, I have a real live suspect who's headed downtown on his way to giving up the big enchilada. 10 to 1, he'll be signing his confession by dawn.
The small, mercurial Mulcahy twitched a shrug.
On the off chance you're right, do us all a favor and read him his rights, he added. That's why Jack's here. Flores smirked, then clapped his partner Nesto on the back. He keeps that little legal card in his wallet.
Nesto grinned and dipped a chin in awkward confirmation.
But I gotta tell you, Flores continued, sometimes the perps are in such a rush to give it up. Nesto can't get it out in time to recite the lines. But we try. Anyway, thanks for the college consult on this one. You really knocked it out of the park, Finnegan.
Flores punctuated his sarcasm with a shit-eating grin.
So it's not a complete waste of trip. Do you mind if I take a picture of the girl?
Mulcahy asked this before Flores could turn away. The bulking detective reacted warily, unsure what the college pencil pusher was up to. Finally, he jerked his head toward the photographer, then said, Cherry here will have all the photos in the morning. Flores reached out and good-naturedly slapped one of his meat hooks on the photographer's shoulder.
He certainly will. But they won't be of her, Mulcahy corrected.
Confusion once again swept Flores's fleshy face.
Why is it that everything that comes out of this motherfucker's mouth is a riddle?
Before Flores could ponder this, loud noises and shouted voices suddenly erupted from inside the house. Flores flashed the quick moves of a wrestler, gracefully maneuvering his bulk through the patio door and into the house. Mulcahy trailed him, proceeding without urgency. He suspected he already knew what was happening inside. As he stepped from the patio, the coroner called after him.
Whatever you do, don't let what's going on in there come out here, Winnick warned, moving closer to the body as if protecting his charge. Not till we get the gurney out here. This here is not a sight for decent people. No, sir.
Mulcahy nodded his promise and then entered the house. In the living room, 3 police officers were struggling to restrain a blonde woman in her mid-30s. The estranged Mrs. Franklin, with big hair and bell-bottoms, was shouting from the top of her lungs and clawing with everything in her, trying to reach the kitchen and the horrors that lay beyond. Her red-painted artificial fingernails looked like bloody talons.
I'll kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you, she repeated in an extended exhale that sounded like a mantra. If you hurt my baby, I'll kill you, you bastard, you fucking bastard. You couldn't control me. You couldn't keep me in your pathetic little box with your small mind and your small life and your putrid beer. So you take her. You take her away from me? The only good thing we ever did. And you take her? You bastard! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!
Anita Franklin was twisting and turning, wrestling and writhing against the officer's attempts to restrain her. Her face reddened, and white spittle gathered at the corners of her lipstick-colored mouth. Her Aquanet-secured hair was coming undone. The muscles and veins of her neck stood out like wires under the skin as she hurled threats and slung accusations. Flores was in front of her now, a stout Steelers defensive lineman blocking her path to the kitchen, where her blood-covered husband sat slump-shouldered under the watchful eye of a uniformed officer.
Mrs. Franklin, please, Flores implored. This really isn't doing anyone any good. If you settle down, I can tell you how you can help us make your husband pay for what he's done."
Flores's offer of revenge seemed to get her attention. She eased her frantic efforts at freedom, but her muscles remained taut. She was ready to pounce should the officers loosen their grip.
"There, there, Mrs. Franklin," Flores continued, soothingly.
The woman's eyes, hooded with sky-blue cosmetic, sharpened their focus on the beefy detective.
"Don't you call me that," she spat.
"I'm sorry," Flores said. Not an apology, but rather in askance over how he'd offended her.
"I'm not Mrs. Franklin," she growled.
I don't want anything from that poor excuse for a man, least of all his name. I'm Anita Dauber, and I want that bastard to die for murdering my angel.
Flores nodded. He was in complete agreement, and he now saw his path to shoehorning yet another suspect into a prison cell.
I can only imagine how you must feel, Miss Dauber, Flores said,
resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and subtly signaling the officers to slowly ease their hold. The alpha detective was taking custody of what he was convinced would be his star witness.
I can assure you that whoever did this terrible thing, he will pay, Flores went on. But we need evidence. So tell me, why are you so sure your husband did this?
Anita Dauber collected herself, regaining composure. All the while, Mulcahy observed unnoticed from the shadows of the hallway.
Because he's an impotent, vindictive little prick who had no other way of getting back at me for leaving him for a real man.
Anita Dauber shouted the retort so her husband in the next room could hear every word. She sniffed and ran an elongated fingernail under the corner of one eye, wiping away a single tear while preserving her elaborate makeup. Then she used the same hand to fan her flushed face.
Does he have a knife? Flores asked. A hunting knife? The kind with a jagged edge?
Flores watched his witness expectantly, eager to add another bar to Al Franklin's prison cell.
He hunts, she happily confirmed. More like he goes off with his loser buddies to drink beer and play poker. But yeah, he has the stuff, the knives, all that shit.
Only then did the mother seem to realize the full import of what she'd just said. Her features crumpled, and Anita Dauber let loose with a long, loud wail of pain.
"Oh, my God," she bellowed. "He carved up my baby girl. He butchered her. He butchered my angel."
The mother dissolved into uncontrollable sobs in an outpouring of grief so violent it seemed to sap all energy. At once she collapsed. The officer's hands, once needed to restrain her, now caught her fall. They guided her to the gutted family room's only seat, the pathetic folding lawn chair. Flores frowned as he watched this, knowing he would not get anything else from her. Not tonight. In the hallway, Mulcahy turned away as well. That's when he caught sight of the lone frame tacked to a wall. The rest of the wall space was lined with empty framing hooks and marked with a grid work of dirty squares, where family pictures once hung. Just the one frame remained. In it, a blonde, smiling, freckled-cheeked girl of about 5 looked out from the dusty glass. Still, the life radiating from the image seemed to hold unnatural power, as if the little girl's long-ago smile could lift the gloom of this sad and damaged home. Then Mulcahy noticed something else. A wallet-sized image of the same girl, now 6 or 7 years older. The smaller picture, the kind taken annually at the start of the school year, was tucked into the corner of the frame. Mulcahy plucked out the smaller picture and held it close to his face. He studied it as if it were a work of art. To him, it was. For this was the real Alicia Franklin. And this was what the case was all about. It showed everything that had been stolen from the world. Mulcahy palmed the picture and slipped it into the pocket of his wool slacks. It would remain in his wallet for the next 34 years.